You thought you chose your cat, but what if it was never your decision? What if, long before you met, long before the shelter visit, the stray encounter, the coincidence that brought you together, they were already on their way to you, not as a pet, not for comfort, but as a sentinel, placed by divine design to guard your spirit in ways you wouldn't understand until the darkness came. Because in this life, when love is fleeting, when the mind feels scattered, when something deep inside you begins to forget what it means to be whole, they remember and they come. You call it adoption, but it was an ancient reunion, a soul contract, a return. They are not mere pets, but sentinels placed by divine design. Edgar Cayce, 1943. If you've ever felt your cat showed up at just the right moment, not by accident, but by something higher, then stay with me. Because what you're about to hear next was never meant to be found. And yet, it waited, quietly, for you. The year was 1943. The world was in flames. War raged across continents, and humanity, as Edgar Cayce once put it, had begun to forget its soul. In a quiet room in Virginia Beach, far from the battlefields, the man known as the Sleeping Prophet lay down once again on his leather couch. His breathing slowed. His eyes fluttered behind closed lids. And just like hundreds of times before, something shifted not just in his body, but in the room itself. The air grew thick, like a threshold had opened. His secretary, Gladys Davis, prepared her stenograph with trembling fingers, not because she feared what would come, but because she sensed it would change everything. Cayce had given readings on everything from natural remedies to future wars, from Atlantis to Jesus, but what he said this day was different. He began to speak softly at first, then with a cadence that seemed borrowed from somewhere far beyond time. What poured through was not medical advice, nor a geological prediction. It was a revelation about something most people overlook, something soft-footed, whiskered, and sleeping silently in the corner of our homes. The cat, Cayce said, is not what it seems. He spoke of a time in the future, a time just like ours, when humanity would be drowning in spiritual amnesia, a time when technology would outpace wisdom, when the heart would ache, not from war, but from disconnection. In that time, he said, certain beings would be present, not in robes or with wings, but in fur. They would not preach, nor ask for worship. They would simply be watching, purring, waiting. These creatures, Cayce continued, are not mere pets. They are sentinels, placed by divine design. He described how cats, yes, cats carried within them vibrational signatures tuned to specific humans, almost like keys designed for particular locks. Each feline would seek out the person they were meant to anchor. Their purpose wasn't to entertain or amuse, but to guard. Not the house, not possessions, but the soul. He spoke of thresholds between worlds, of invisible veils that most humans could not see, but which cats moved through effortlessly. They would sit at the edge of your bed at night, he said, not simply because it was warm, but because they were standing guard as you traveled in dreams. They would curl in your lap, not just for affection, but because your energy was unraveling, and their presence restructured it. Cayce warned of a tide, a global wave of unconsciousness that would make people forget who they truly are, forget their light, forget their purpose. But these feline guardians, he said, would remain awake. And when the darkness came, they would stay. When the Great Awakening begins, he whispered, they will anchor those who are ready to remember. The words struck Gladys so deeply that she stopped typing. She looked at him, eyes closed, mouth still moving, and she realized she was hearing something sacred. A message not for her generation, but for one to come, perhaps for ours. For decades, this reading was archived, buried in the Association for Research and Enlightenment, overlooked, dismissed. Cayce had said many extraordinary things, but a prophecy about cats that was too strange, too esoteric, too unscientific. Until now, because now something is happening. In homes across the world, cats are doing things no textbook ever taught. They're soothing anxiety in veterans, sitting vigil beside the dying, helping children with no words speak for the first time. And their eyes, those deep, unblinking eyes, seem to know something, as if they remember the world before we forgot, as if they never left their post. First of all, thank you truly for staying with me this far. The fact that you're still here means this message is already resonating somewhere deep within you. And maybe that's not an accident either, because what Cayce said next in that long-forgotten reading wasn't just mystical poetry, it was specific. He claimed that each cat carries, embedded within its cells, a unique vibrational code, a signature, not random, not general, but perfectly attuned to a specific human being. He described it like this: just as tuning forks can only resonate with a particular frequency, certain souls, feline and human, are destined to meet because their energies are matched. And not only matched, but meant to harmonize in times of spiritual disarray. It's as if cats come into our lives not to change who we are, but to stabilize what's already beginning to unravel gently, quietly, with no words and no expectations. Have you ever wondered why your cat chose you? Why they followed you home? Why they looked at you through that window, that alley, that shelter cage, and you just knew? According to Cayce, it's not instinct, it's assignment. These cats aren't adopted. They arrive when the veils between worlds thin and your energy, whether broken or awakening, begins to signal. And when it does, their inner compass, something we don't have a name for, locks on. They find you because they were built to. This vibrational bond doesn't operate in the realm of language or logic. It moves in the undercurrents through emotion, trauma, memory, silence. Cats know when you can't speak. They sense when your nervous system is flooded. They feel it in their bones when you're smiling but breaking inside. And when that happens, they come closer not for comfort alone, but for rebalancing. Cayce believed cats act like soul mirrors. When you're out of alignment, they absorb the chaos, not by accident, but by design. They sit on your chest, not because it's warm, but because your heart is dissonant and they're recalibrating its rhythm. They curl around your head at night, not just for companionship, but because your thoughts are spinning into the void and they're there to pull you back. They're not psychic in the way we define it. They're tuned to frequencies of grief, fear, overwhelm, and soul-deep fatigue. And when you break, they don't. What's more, Cayce warned that in the coming age, our age, human consciousness would be bombarded, not just with fear or misinformation, but with forgetfulness. We wouldn't remember who we are, why we're here, what matters. And in that forgetting, the world would become louder, faster, colder. But cats, he said, would hold the line. They would remain as anchors, not for the body, but for the soul. The vibrational blueprint each cat carries acts like a tether, preventing their chosen human from slipping too far into fragmentation. It's subtle, it's slow, but it works. And we've all felt it, that unspoken moment when you come home from a terrible day. Shattered, spinning, maybe even close to giving up. And then they look at you. Just look. And something inside you stops unraveling. That's not coincidence. That's connection on a plane we've never fully understood. Cayce spoke of the coming darkness, but he wasn't talking about politics or war. He meant spiritual amnesia, and he believed cats were a part of the cure. They don't fix you. They stay with you. When friends don't, when family can't, when you've stopped trusting yourself, they stay. And somehow, that quiet, unbothered presence begins to remind you, not in words, but in rhythm, that your light was never gone, just buried. So maybe that's why your cat found you. Not because you needed a pet, but because your soul was calling, and they heard it first. And maybe you're still wondering, could this really be true? Is it all just comforting mythology dressed in poetry and love? I used to think the same until I found what I'm about to share with you. Because not long ago, a physicist named Dr. Sarah Chen, MIT trained, logic driven, the last person to believe in anything spiritual, found herself unraveling everything she once thought she knew. Her life was facts, numbers, and equations. Her world was particle accelerators and peer-reviewed journals. But then came Schrödinger, not the famous physicist, the cat. A tabby she adopted half-jokingly, naming him after the paradox that defined quantum uncertainty. She thought it was cute, but what began as a name became a mirror. Schrödinger the cat didn't behave like other animals. He would fall asleep beside her laptop at night, purring softly. And by morning, equations she'd been struggling with for weeks would suddenly resolve themselves in her mind. Not gradually, not through deep focus or eureka moments, but instantly, as if the solution had been inserted into her consciousness from outside herself. At first, she laughed it off. Sleep, coincidence, mental decluttering. But it kept happening. Not once, not twice, over and over, with precision. And that precision began to frighten her, because science doesn't like what it can't replicate. So she set out to measure the impossible. She installed electromagnetic field detectors around her home. Sophisticated tools, the kind used in experimental physics labs to detect fluctuations in the environment. And what she found broke everything. When Schrödinger entered a room, the entire electromagnetic signature of the space would shift, not randomly, but intelligently. The fields formed geometric patterns, complex, beautiful, structured, not noise, not chaos, but something that looked eerily similar to neural networks, or worse, the quantum entanglement diagrams she studied in theoretical models. Her cat, in essence, was producing energy fields that mirrored the structure of conscious intelligence without speaking, without moving, without trying, just by being. She recalibrated the instruments, tested multiple times, brought in backup equipment. Same results. The pattern was real, but it wasn't just patterns, it was frequency. Schrödinger's purring registered consistently at 26 Hz, the precise frequency scientifically proven to aid in human bone regeneration and cellular healing. She realized what science had missed. Cats are biological instruments, emitting vibrational therapies through their bodies without anyone asking. They're not healing us because they want to. They're doing it because they are built to. Dr. Chen's research began to expand. She discovered that the purring also affected human brainwaves, especially in the ranges associated with stress, anxiety, and emotional trauma. The implications were staggering. The cat's body was modulating human neurology without drugs, without speech, without consent, simply by curling up beside us. The vocal cords of these animals were not just for meows. They were acting as consciousness tools, finely tuned instruments, recalibrating the human spirit in real time. And the more she looked, the more she found. Other scientist-skeptics turned believers were noticing similar phenomena. Cats responding to trauma, not with training, but with intuition. Sitting beside PTSD patients during flashbacks, calming children with autism without ever being trained as therapy animals, acting not with instinct, but with insight. She began calling them quantum translators, creatures attuned to a reality that we've only begun to sense. They weren't interacting with our world through our logic. They were helping us interface with theirs. Dr. Chen wasn't trying to prove anything spiritual, but what she found didn't belong to just science anymore. It felt like science brushing up against the edges of mystery, as if the physical and metaphysical had always been two sides of the same veil. So no, it's not just comforting mythology. It's physics. It's bioelectric resonance. It's frequency medicine, embedded in fur and paws and purring. It's the universe slipping healing into your home disguised as a house pet. And if this sounds unbelievable, just ask yourself, how many times have you felt better, not from words, not from medicine, not from understanding, but simply because your cat was there? That's not a coincidence. That's science. Catching up with love. Some things are too consistent to be called coincidence. In Tokyo, Hiroshi Tanaka was a mid-level manager at a financial firm, stressed, overworked, with blood pressure climbing dangerously high. He wasn't spiritual. He barely even liked animals. But one night, walking home from the office, he found a stray cat injured, silent, with sharp yellow eyes that stared straight into him. Against all logic, he took her home. And from that night forward, something changed. Every time he opened a stressful email, she would position herself between him and the screen. His anxiety would vanish. No meditation app. No pills. No therapist had ever calmed him the way she did by simply being there. Within 2 weeks, his blood pressure returned to normal. Within a month, he started smiling again. He called her Kokai, which means regret in Japanese. Not because she was one, but because she took his away in São Paulo, Brazil. Maria Santos had grown up with Luna, a tortoiseshell cat she received as a child. As Maria grew older, so did Luna until the cat reached 16, and Maria's grandmother, who lived with them, fell ill. No one noticed it at first, but Luna would always arrive at the grandmother's bedside exactly when her pain spiked. She'd lie beside her without moving, sometimes for hours. The grandmother would calm, smile, sleep. And then one day, during one of those silent vigils, she passed away peacefully, without fear. The family said it was like she just stepped from one room to another. Maria said she didn't go alone. Luna went with her to the threshold and came back. In rural Canada, an 8-year-old boy named Caleb had never spoken a single word. Diagnosed on the severe end of the autism spectrum, He lived in a world without language. His parents had tried everything: speech therapy, music therapy, special education. Nothing worked. Then, a rescue organization suggested a therapy cat. They were skeptical, but from the day Maple arrived a quiet, amber-eyed Maine Coon, Caleb began to change. First, he reached out to touch her, then he laughed, and one morning, 2 weeks later, his mother heard something she never thought she would: ma, pla. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't loud, but it was his. And in that moment, they realized something no specialist had ever been able to explain: that love, when delivered in stillness, could bypass the pathways even science couldn't reach. And these are just a few. The stories are pouring in. From New York to New Delhi. From veterans with PTSD who find peace only when their cat is near. To elderly people in nursing homes rediscovering joy in caring for a being who never judges their wrinkles or forgetfulness. Cats sitting beside chemo patients. Cats waiting at the front door of homes moments before someone receives bad news. Cats staring, unblinking, into corners of rooms as if they see what we don't. Some people call it intuition. Others say it's coincidence. But those who felt it really felt it no better. These cats know. What Edgar Cayce described 80 years ago is no longer a hidden message buried in a dusty archive. It's happening right now. In apartments, on back porches, in hospital beds. These are not fairy tales or exaggerations. They're quiet revolutions in how we understand connection, healing, and the soul. Every one of these cats didn't just arrive, they appeared, timed, matched, measured not by logic, but by love. So if you've ever felt like your cat came to you when you needed them most, you're not alone. The timing wasn't random. The comfort wasn't accidental. It was part of something older, something wise, something true. And if you haven't said it yet, maybe tonight's the night. Thank you. If you've ever experienced something like this, a moment where your cat just knew, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if this message found its way to you, maybe you were meant to hear it. I'm grateful you stayed. You know, the more stories I hear, the harder it is to believe this is just emotion or nostalgia. At some point, the coincidences pile up so high, they begin to look like patterns. And when that happens, well, someone had to ask, what if it's measurable? What if all these quiet miracles aren't just happening in isolation, but are part of something intelligently orchestrated? That's exactly what a group of researchers, data scientists, and behaviorists set out to explore. With access to tens of millions of adoption records, vet reports, personal testimonies, and biometric data, they began feeding everything they could into high-level quantum neural network systems designed to detect patterns the human mind can't. Their goal wasn't spiritual, it was statistical. They wanted to find out if there was any evidence that cat-human pairings followed something beyond randomness. What they found shattered everything they thought they knew about chance. Across cities, countries, even generations, these cats weren't just randomly chosen by people at shelters or rescued from streets in moments of kindness. They were arriving during major life transitions: divorce, grief, illness, spiritual awakening. But more than that, when mapped across time and behavioral psychology, the cats who entered certain lives weren't just similar, they were nearly identical in energy profile. Different species, different breeds, different continents, but showing up with behaviors, temperaments, and needs that perfectly mirrored the emotional gaps of the humans they found. It was as if they were magnetically pulled to the precise soul who needed them most, not weeks later, not years before, but exactly on time. The AI began mapping probability trees, running simulations on what it would take for these matches to occur naturally. After months of analysis, the results were staggering. One leading algorithm calculated that the odds of these coincidences, the timing, the pairings, the emotional alignment happening without intelligent interference were approximately 1 in 847 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's more unlikely than flipping a coin and landing on heads 50 times in a row and then having it land on its edge. It's rarer than the number of atoms in the observable universe, which means, statistically speaking, this isn't random. It's design, and the implications don't stop at probability. Genealogical studies began to uncover something even stranger: that certain cats who'd never met, in different lifetimes and places, displayed nearly identical behavior patterns when paired with humans, sharing specific psychological traits. Almost like echoes across time, as if the connection between the souls existed before the bodies ever did. As if we're not just being matched in this lifetime, but across lifetimes. That's when researchers, some still too cautious to use spiritual terms, began calling these events non-linear destinies. That phrase stuck with me, because it speaks to something bigger than coincidence. It speaks to orchestration, not just fate, but intention. Some higher intelligence, whether divine or quantum or something in between, is weaving these threads, guiding cats to humans not by habit or luck, but by soul resonance. And maybe that's the real reason we feel so much when they find us. Because deep down, on a level that words can't touch, something in us recognizes them. We don't remember how, but we remember them. Like a face from a dream, or a name you haven't spoken in centuries but never quite forgot. They show up. You lock eyes, and suddenly, the timing of it, all the way they came into your life, no longer feels random. It feels scripted, but not by you, by something wiser. So the next time someone tells you it's just a cat, you'll know better. And maybe you'll smile and say nothing, because how do you explain to someone who hasn't felt it yet that love this perfect, this impossibly timed, isn't accidental? It's evidence, quiet, sacred evidence, that the universe is far more alive, more intelligent, more loving than we ever dared to believe. If something in you feels lighter right now, or if your heart just whispered, I knew it, let that be your sign. And if this message mirrors something you've always felt but never had words for, share it. There's someone else out there waiting to remember, just like you did, maybe now. The next time your cat looks at you in that quiet, unblinking way, only cats can, you'll see it differently. You'll realize they're not just staring at you, they're holding you. Not physically, but energetically. As if their gaze is reminding you of something you were about to forget, that you're not alone, that you're still whole, that the light in you hasn't gone out, only dimmed. There's a reason why those eyes feel ancient. It's because they are. They carry a memory far older than this life. A memory not bound to language or culture, but to soul. And when you lock eyes with them, you're not just looking at a pet. You're looking into a portal, into a presence that remembers you beyond this moment, beyond this lifetime, beyond even your pain. Edgar Cayce didn't see cats as accessories or afterthoughts. He saw them as guardians, placed at the edge of forgetting, positioned at the doorway between the physical and the eternal. He said they would arrive in an age of spiritual amnesia, when humans, despite their technological brilliance, would begin to lose themselves. And when that time came, they wouldn't preach, they wouldn't persuade, they would simply stay, sit, watch, and love, without asking, without needing, without fail. That time is now. And maybe that's why your cat is in your life today. Maybe that's why, during your hardest seasons, they didn't walk away. Maybe that's why, when your thoughts spun into chaos or your heart closed in grief, they did the simplest thing imaginable. They lay down beside you, not to change you, not to fix you, but to be with you. Because that, in itself, is holy. That, in itself, is what the world forgets. And they remember. We like to think we rescued them. But what if they were the ones rescuing us all along? One purr at a time. One glance across the room. One quiet act of unconditional love, wrapped in fur and stillness and the patience of something far older than human comprehension. Something placed, something sent. So if you're listening to this now, and you're starting to feel something move in your chest, a warmth, a knowing, a soft ache that says this matters, hold on to that. That's memory returning. That's soul remembering. That's your thread being rewoven into something whole. And you, dear soul, are exactly where you're meant to be. If this spoke to something you've always felt but never had the words for, I hope you'll share it. Share your story. Share this video. Because maybe someone else out there is still waiting for the moment they remember too. And if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe, not just to support the channel, but to stay connected to stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain, they awaken. Because around here, we don't just tell stories. We remember the truth you came here trying not to forget.